Hey everybody, this is Attorney Davis Younts. I'm here with my law partner, Byrd. And so we're going to talk about Trump's executive order reinstating military members who were impacted by COVID. But the real question is, now what? So this executive order is out. Now, what do we do about it? Who does it impact? How do we get relief for our clients, even as it applies to me, for myself personally? How do we go about doing that? So that's what we're going to be talking about for the next few minutes here. I'm going to start with just kind of breaking down two parts of the executive order, and then we'll walk through the different categories of people that are impacted by it. So the intent, the design of this executive order really is to reinstate those that were discharged or forced out of the military as a result of the COVID vaccine. The category that everyone's talking about, that everyone seems to be focused on, the first category is between 8,500 and 9,000 individuals who were specifically administratively discharged from the military because they did not have the COVID vaccine. That may look a little bit different for folks. You have people that filed a religious accommodation request that was denied. They received an order of the vaccine. They didn't get it. Then they were discharged. You have those that submitted a medical exemption. You have those that simply objected to the lawfulness of the order and were discharged. That's that 8,600 to 9,000 that have been at least partially identified. The other broader category that is also impacted by this executive order is those individuals who were forced out. Now, some of those might look like a voluntary separation, depending on how it went down for each individual. But the executive order, and I'm glad it does, but the executive order hits on this category of individuals who were denied the opportunity to re-enlist, were forced into an early retirement, didn't extend a contract, weren't able to PCS or something else. So they weren't technically administratively discharged as a result of not getting the COVID vaccine, as a result of the COVID mandate, but they were otherwise forced out. Now, there are other categories of folks we're going to talk about later on and talk about how to get relief for those folks, but that's the executive order. Those are the two categories of it. Caleb, what thoughts do you want to share about kind of the intent and the application of the order?
Well, I think we're both really excited about this executive order. And my first thought really goes to why would anyone who was forced out of the military over the COVID-19 vaccine, why would they want to go back into the military at this point? And to steal a quote from a really good friend of mine, he always used to say, "The government cannot be trusted with those who believe in it." And the military
Mm,
is the same way, right? This is a phenomenal opportunity for people who had good progressing careers in the military to go back in and to reassert the values that we want to see back into the military. And so this EO is a great opportunity for people to go back in to finish their careers, to continue their career, to progress with their career, and to really get after something that you and I have been concerned about for a long time, which is that COVID was really being used by the prior administration to get rid of conservatives, to get rid of Christians, to clear the decks so that they could enforce their agenda with no speed bumps and with no guardrails. Now's the time
the
to get people
great,
back
the
in.
great purge,
The
the
great
great
purge.
purge. No, and so I think you're right. I think this is an incredible opportunity for those that feel called to do it, for those that see the mission field that is the United States military today. There are going to be people that are willing and are interested in going back in, and this does say to them, okay, we're not just going to let you come back in. We're going to let you come back in. We're going to restore rank. We're going to give you back pay. It's going to be, something I think that is helpful to these folks. Now, there's always going to be caveats. There's going to be limitations. There's going to be details that come out in this, but at least that door is opened for these folks. And it is an opportunity to get people who were not just, part of groupthink, who actually were reading the Constitution, understanding the law, who were discriminated against based on their religious faith. It does give them the opportunity to come back in. That's exciting. For me, what was really encouraging is seeing the Secretary of Defense, Hegseth, apologize to the
Yeah,
military members that were kicked
huge.
out of COVID. I mean, that to me is just an acknowledgement of how poorly this was handled, which is what so many of us were trying to get people to understand as we were doing it. We're just trying to get recognition. This is this is not how you're doing it. You're not doing this in a lawful manner, and we don't have to trample the Constitution, religious freedom. We don't have to trample common sense simply because there's a quote unquote crisis. Because if we do it with COVID, it's only going to get worse. So I want to ask you this. I know I have some thoughts on this I can talk about. Have you spoken to anyone yet? Have you talked to anyone, or what are your general thoughts about whether or not these people that were kicked out are going to want to come back in?
There seems to be right now to be a lot of interest from the people that you and I have been working with. I mean, our phone's been ringing off the hook the last couple of days, people looking for more information. And, we're waiting for more information too. We're waiting to see exactly how this is going to be implemented. But you and I have been working with clients for, the last several years who were kicked out over COVID. I'm thinking of one in particular. We had a really good result for him at the discharge review board. He got a full upgrade, and even then, we get his upgrade. He's upgraded all the way to an honorable, all the way to an RE code 1. And in the opinion memo from the discharge review board, it said, although the COVID vaccine order was lawful, the military didn't do anything wrong. He violated lawful military order by not taking the COVID vaccine, dot, dot, dot. We're going to upgrade you all, all the way up to the top, right?
Right.
And so for Secretary Hegseth to come out and apologize, it's really the first acknowledgement from anyone in official capacity that we have seen come out and say this was wrong. It never should have happened, and it's a huge break in the dam, frankly.
Yeah. And so I had, this, Caleb, I spent essentially all day on the phone with different former clients, some of them current clients who are just in the different categories of people impacted this, talking to them about, do they want to go back in? Do they want to serve again? What would that look like? And even some that have stayed in because they actually didn't have a choice. They had a service commitment or otherwise, and they actually would have wanted to leave. As far as because of what happened during COVID and whether or not they would want to continue to serve. And I will tell you, there's some level of excitement out there, but there's also a lot of fear and a lot of concern
Absolutely.
among these folks. And when I say fear, I don't mean, lack of courage. The fear is that there's going to be a lack of accountability. So
Right.
there's been a lot of conversations about accountability. Are we going to do a hot wash? Are we going to do an after action report and actually talk about what happened during COVID and how we got here? And so, I think that we can be excited about this executive order. We can be excited about what it's going to mean and what it's going to do, and still recognize what happened during COVID was wrong. It shouldn't have happened. It was an illegal order. There was unconstitutional discrimination against people who were seeking a religious accommodation. There was no logic and common sense applied to medical exemptions. And again, once the mandate came down, the Department of Defense did not make available to military members an FDA licensed
Yeah.
product. Wasn't available. It was all emergency use only. It was all experimental products. So all of these things combined to demonstrate this was an unlawful order, this was an illegal practice, and it was dangerous because it did create this constitutional crisis. This idea that in an emergency, the executive branch can ignore federal law, can ignore the Constitution, can ignore the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, and just move forward with something, forcing it on military members who swear an oath to support and defend the Constitution. So that's a big deal. And nothing I want to talk about next sort of undermines how passionately I feel about this and why I was involved in fighting with so many people, fighting for myself to be able to continue to serve during this. But I think we can recognize that and then say, okay, now what are the practical things we can
Yeah.
do? What's next? So, for those who are out there that are thinking about, do I go back in and serve? I'll be praying for you. I'll be praying with you. Be thinking about that. I think there will be some opportunities to go and do that. So now I want to talk about, I do want to go into though the different categories of people. So I think there are several different categories of people that were impacted by this. And I think getting relief now going forward is going to be different for each one. Some of this is speculative. We're just trying to get into the details, but I think this is at least going to be some decent advice moving forward. So that first category that's talked about in the executive order is these folks who were discharged, involuntarily separated because they didn't get the COVID vaccine. For those folks, they should be identified in this 8,500 to 9,000 category. The Marine Corps has already sent out text messages and emails to a bunch of our clients. So the Marine Corps has already sent out this information to the people that they're identifying in their personnel records as affected. And there's an email address that is there that you can respond to and put in an inquiry. So my first thought is, hey, if you fall in that category and you get that contact, at least respond to that email to see what the response is, to see what the stipulations are, to see what information is there. And if you get good information, reach out to us. We'd love, we're waiting to hear what that response looks like, what the process looks like. So that's one piece of this. I will caveat to say, it looks like, as the details comes down, it looks like there will be some limitations on back pay. It looks like there's going to be anyone that's been receiving VA disability benefits. It looks like they're going to subtract that potentially from the back pay. It also looks like if you had a federal job. So if you were kicked out of the military and you went into a federal job, it's possible they will offset your back pay by the salary you're earning from your federal job. So again, all of these details will come forward, but there are going to be some stipulations on it. And we just need to know more so we can address that and certainly advocate for something that's more fair and more appropriate to make individuals whole. So, but that really is the first category. So I would say, monitor your email, monitor your phone messages, and look for service-specific messages that come out. We'll talk about them when we see them, but look for service-specific messages to come out to respond to. So that's the first category. The other two categories I want to talk about, because I think relief is going to look somewhat different, right? So the other category is this idea of, were you forced out? Did you leave the military, whether it was quote unquote voluntary or not? Did you leave because of the COVID mandate? If that's the case, then I think there's going to be a separate application process. Again, we don't know what that looks like, but the executive order anticipates that there will be an affirmation, some sort of a statement from you saying, this is who I am, this is when I served, and this is why I was forced out. Again, based on the executive order, there may well be a path for back pay and reinstatement for those individuals. The detail issue here is going to be understanding and making sure the record is clear on what happened. For example, we have a client that I went on Newsmax with this week. He was not discharged for not getting the shot. He went to a discharge board. The discharge board did recommend separation, but the Congress acted, the mandate ended, so he didn't have to be separated. The Army went and did another board that we didn't represent him at, but they did another board, and they said, well, you got a general officer memorandum of reprimand for violating an order not to get a shot, so we're going to kick you out for violating that order, not for getting the shot. We're going to kick you out for doing this. And the change in the NDAA didn't impact him. So he was still forced. I mean, we got him to retirement, right? Our representation of him, at least he got to 20 years, but he was forced out early. He was going into a good assignment. He had work college done. I mean, his trajectory was moving up. He was going to be a colonel until this happened. So he still got kicked out. So that's an example of someone who was forced out, where on paper, it's like, no, you were kicked out for quote unquote violating a lawful order otherwise. So that's the example of we're going to see. So reenlistments and other things are going to be out there that we're going to have to look at. People that were denied. We have another client who was 15 years of service, Air Force side, 15 years of service. We got him past the initial attempts to punish him and kick him out. The injunction came in federal court, but he was actually forced out. They didn't let him reenlist, right? And they tried to make it not about COVID. They tried to make it about not following an order and otherwise. But again, they still pushed him out, didn't allow him to reenlist. And so that would be a case that I would argue the executive order anticipates, and there should be a path for those individuals to come back in as well. So we don't know what that process looks like yet. That may be some sort of a application packet, this affirmation, the statement. We'll be standing by to help with those. But that's that category.
Well, and let me,
Go ahead.
Well,
Go ahead.
let me just say here, because there's a couple of different things in this category. One is what we would call the bad paper discharge, right? So instead of doing a separation for failure to obey a lawful order, what we do is we give you a bad paper separation for, well, we're separating you because you received a GOMAR or an LOR, you have bad paper in your file, and therefore should not, you have to show cause to continue service. So we were definitely seeing those. I think the other in that category that we would be looking for is someone who um, was going to be separated, but for Congress's action, they complete their ADSO, but they still get like a bar to re-enlistment, right?
Yes.
To where a commander comes in and says, really don't care about what Congress said about COVID. I'm going to bar you to re-enlistment. Because of your bar to re-enlistment, you're not going to be able to continue serving. And then that's just an administrative processing out of the military that may not be a formal separation, but something like a bar to re-enlistment because of COVID that prevents you from taking on another enlistment contract. And then probably within that as well, there's a lot of folks like you and me who voluntarily left the military because of everything that was going on at the time, right? Are those going to be considered as part of this as well? People who voluntarily said, like, I'm not going to continue on as an officer, I'm not going to seek reenlistment. Like, are those going to be part of this? I don't know that we have a good answer for that yet. But I think that those are probably going to be either in this category or maybe a distinct category of their own. And this is part of what we're waiting to see play out.
Yeah, how broad this category is going to be. You know, for me, I was going to be kicked out. The only thing that saved me was an injunction in federal court. And so because of the injunction, I was able to get to 20 years of active, combined active and reserve time. So I retired right exactly, 20 years and 1 day from the Air Force Reserves. And I wouldn't necessarily have retired then. I wouldn't have walked away then. I would have liked the opportunity to continue to serve. But because of everything going on with the mandate and otherwise, there was no way I was going to continue. I just wanted to get to 20 and walk away because everything was so uncertain. The administration was so uncertain. I had no desire to continue to be a part of that. The other interesting kind of nuance in this category that is going to be much harder to figure out, I don't think they're going to be directly impacted by the executive order. And I think we're going to have to look at the Board of Corrections process for them, is those people who were subjected to punishment over violating quote unquote COVID policies, right? So we're going to go back in the Wayback Machine for a second here and just remember what it was like. And I know the folks that were impacted by this know what it was like, but everybody else has forgotten. Just remember what it was like for those of us who were standing the line and were impacted by these policies. So even with injunctions in federal court and everything else, I mean, it was the treatment of those who had a pending religious accommodation request were wild at times. And sometimes it was installation and service specific, but there was a time when most Navy personnel were not allowed to go to the chapel because it was a gathering of too many people. There were a time when, personnel were sequestered to ships, sequestered to their barracks, sequestered to their dorms, weren't allowed to leave their house. There were people who were not allowed to take leave. They were not allowed to go home and visit their families on Christmas break. They were not allowed to have visitors come to the installation. There were people that were essentially, locked on house arrest for a year because they were unvaccinated, even if they had a pending exemption or accommodation or something else, and they were subjected to, absurd masking and testing policies. They were forced to wear masks that were not FDA authorized for the purpose that they were using. They had never been tested for long-term wear, and people were being forced to do them, and they'd be the only people in a workplace that would be forced to do it, even if they were allowed to come back to the workplace. So there were people that the chain of command, quite frankly, was just waiting for one little screw up. Oh, did they take their mask down? I saw them walking down the hallway with their mask down. That's going to be a reprimand for violating an order and violating a lawful order, and we're going to kick them out. So there were many, many people. We represented some, I don't know how many thousands more there were that were sort of caught up on what I would call trumped up allegations of violating some ridiculous COVID policy that was discriminatory and not based on science. Certainly, as this thing went on longer and longer, natural immunity was an issue and the military ignored that. So there were absolutely efforts that were made to punish military members who were standing against this vaccine, and there were suicides. And I don't want to talk about the details because I want to go into the families, but there were there were suicides, and a lot of our clients will know who we're talking about, people that took their life because of the isolation they were in because of what happened. So again, I'm excited about this executive order. I'm happy about this. That doesn't mean we forget what happened. So don't know how far the executive order is going to go to addressing those individuals who were forced out, not discharged, but forced out. Don't know what it's going to look like for those who were forced out over a violation of a COVID policy, COVID mandate policy. But that's kind of where we're at there. So now, and I don't want this to go too long today, so I want to transition to what do we do practically, right? So I'll let you touch on anything else you have on that before we transition, Caleb.
Yeah, I think there's also maybe one more subcategory, potential
Mm,
other category along with this as well. And this is the other misconduct related to COVID, but not specific to like refusing the vaccine or COVID policy. And I think my favorite example of this is a fake vaccine card guy, right? Because
mhm,
one of the things you and I both saw was people who were like, "Well, I know what I'll do. I'll go get a fake vaccine card. I'll turn my
mhm.
fake vaccine card in. I still won't take the vaccine, but nobody will know, right?" And so then you had people in that situation who were getting kicked out for, false official statements and those kind of things. So again, there's these concentric circles. There's a giant Venn diagram of people who were kicked out over COVID, and what we're really curious to see is how do you equitably put those people back in a position that they would have been but for these COVID policies.
Right.
So right. So what do we do now? The
Yeah.
biggest thing that we're doing now is if you are thinking about coming back into the military under a reinstatement, regardless of your specific circumstance, I think the best thing for you to do right now is start getting your records together. Make sure you've got all of your military records ready to go, and then give us a call to be able to talk about specifically how your situation may be impacted. Because
Right.
what we want to do is there's going to be a lot of work that's going to have to go into these cases while we're waiting to hear on how the EO is going to be implemented.
Right.
I think one of the things that you and I are both hoping for is that the way it's implemented should not be will just apply to the BCMR.
Right.
If that happens, it's going to be a 4-year process. The Trump
Right.
administration, because Trump is on his second term, the Trump administration will be over by the time people start being reinstated. But and
Potentially. Yeah.
and so what we are hoping to see is a process separate from the BCMR for the majority of people who can go back efficiently, equitably back into the military.
Right. Right. And so, that category, the first category, the 8,600 to 9,000, that can be handled very easily. I don't even
Right.
think you necessarily need a board or commission. What you're going to need help with is making sure your records are right,
Right.
making sure everything's documented properly, making sure the back pay is accurate, and making sure other aspects of your record are cleaned up. This goes all the way down to bad paper that might still be in a personnel file, but also missed opportunities to promote, missed opportunities to test, missed
Promotion points,
opportunities,
schools.
schools, and even, all the way down to the details of performance reports, right?
Right.
What's on your NCOER, what's on your OER, what's on your OPB or EPB. If you're Air Force, what do your marks look like? What does that fit rep look like? So all of those things are going to come into this. So again, that's the first category. The second category is those forced out. We don't know what that application process is going to look like, but it's going to be the same thing. Get all of your records together, get everything recorded in detail, make sure you have everything ready to go, because your records are going to need to be cleaned up even more, because we weren't just administratively separated over the COVID mandate. You were pushed out for some other reason. So, like we have a client that we'll be working with who had applied for reenlistment, was approved for reenlistment, and then it was pulled back once they realized he hadn't taken the COVID. And it was an end around. It was trying to circumvent the process, but but that client has the email traffic to show that, right? So if that client decides, hey, I'm going to go back in, it's going to be really easy to create that trail. So now is the time to try to get all of that paperwork together, because once the process is finalized, you want to get that filed as quickly as possible, because it's going to take time. All these processes are going to take time. So final category of people that I want to talk about are those that survived and stayed in. And this is thousands and thousands of people that are not addressed in this executive order. So you know who you are. You are the people that we have helped. We fought to get you to stay in. We kept you in, but you still had a letter of reprimand. It created a referral performance report. It created a lack of opportunity to PCS, a lack of opportunity to take a leadership position, a command position, lack of opportunity to go to schools and do all of these other things. So your career, for many of these people, many people I talked to and represented, your career was devastated for
Yeah.
2+ years. And most of you have had a very, very difficult time getting back on track after that. So what about you? What can we do? My answer to that is, this is where we look at the Board of Corrections process, the traditional Board of Corrections process. And I think we need to proceed now as if that's the solution.
Yep.
And if there's a better way, that comes along, great, we can pivot to do that. But now is the time to work those, because just, the Army Board of Corrections for Military Records, just use an Army example, gets between 15 and 20,000 applications a year.
Yeah.
And it's taking 12 to 18 months at a minimum. But we have clients that it's taken 30 months and we're still waiting for a decision from the board. It's still in process with the board. What we don't want is people who should be getting relief, that the intent of President Trump, Secretary Hegseth, is to make this right, try to put your career back together, get you these backdated promotions and potentially back pay and all those things, and not get it in quickly. And then it's the next administration, or we moved on to something else before you get relief. So I do think, even though the Board of Corrections is a lengthy, bureaucratic, time-consuming process, we do a lot of those cases. We've already had success in a couple of COVID cases and getting some relief from the BCMR, even before this executive order. So I think now is the time, let us help you. Let's get engaged. Let's go after these BCMR cases and these pieces, so that we can try to get your career back on track. And we can still, we'll be working with Stand With Warriors, STARS, and other organizations to try to advocate for policy that sets up a special board or a special commission. But there's no guarantee of that. What we know is there is a process to try to get your records fixed. And now is the time. This is going to be the best time, with the intent of the commander in chief. And understand, each service has their own board, and it's the service secretary or their designee that signs off on these packages. And they're going to be appointed and know what the clear intent of the president and the SecDef is. So this is the time to go after that and do that. And this is for all the people that had their career hurt by this or hurt by the COVID policies. So that's where I think that category comes in. And I think we're going to be looking at the traditional BCMR process for those folks. But
Well,
and
let me say,
I got excited there, Caleb. Sorry. I get fired
well,
up about this. That's where I was. So that's probably why I get so fired up.
well, let me say here, people in this category would be people who were, say, active guard reserve, who got
Right.
kicked down to the IRR.
Yes.
And then, after Congress, removes the mandate, then suddenly their career can restart. They can take active guard reserve positions again, or traditional reservist positions again. But now you have this gap of, 18 months to 2 years with
Right.
no pay, no good years for retirement, no retirement points, loss of flight hours, and so loss of OPRs and OERs. And so that's really where, how do we get those people back into an equitable position?
Right.
And that's why, again, this is going to be more complicated, I think, than anyone wants it to be, because
Right.
it's not just about reinstatement. It's not just about people who were forced out. It's not just about people who voluntarily left. It's also about people who uh, are still in the military, whose careers were impacted, but lost ability to get to promotion boards, get to flight
Right.
hours, get
Right.
awards, get OERs, get to schools. And so there's going to be a lot of work. Again, when it comes to the BCMR, it is an absolute nightmarish process that I think you and I would love to see for this administration to really get after. It's an absolutely
Yes.
broken process at this point. And so that's part of why our hope is, who if anyone out there is listening who has anything to do with this EO, the solution should not be, well, just apply to the BCMR for
Right.
reinstatement and everything else. Um,
Right.
the solution on one hand is fix the BCMR, but on the other hand, we're going to have a more efficient process to make sure that the equities are being balanced appropriately.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, this is one of those times, when we think about military law, we really are thinking about it in terms of tort law, right?
It
We're
really
thinking
is, yeah.
about remedy and what was the harm. So we have an unlawful order, we have religious discrimination, we have, a lack of following the medical exemption process that damages someone, it damages their career. How do you make them whole? Well, you can't turn back time. We can't travel back in time, but what we can do is we can pursue points for a good year, recognition of a good year. We can pursue back pay. We can pursue promotion with back pay. We can pursue reinstatement of rank. So the Board of Corrections for military records, although it's a broken process, it's a process that takes way too long. It's a process that they've, I think, intentionally made complicated. So you have to hire attorneys if you're going to have a good chance of success there. But ultimately, they have all the authority that a service secretary does to do all of these incredible things. So again, I hope, my desire, I'm going to be advocating for a commission or a special board, which they have done. There's been times when the DOD has done this to address these COVID impact cases. Otherwise, we're going to be in the normal BCMR process. And if that's where we're at, that's fine. We can do those cases. We'll be doing those cases. We've already started some, but it's going to be important to get them in as quickly as possible.
That's right.
And what we have seen in the past is just like with COVID, we needed the rallying point and we needed critical mass, right? We needed
Yep.
so many people that were filing exemption requests, medical or religious, that it sort of broke the system, right? It slowed things down and forced them to have to address the issue, even though they were ignoring the law. The same thing will happen with these boards. If there are 100,000 people that were impacted by, what happened with COVID, not just kicked out, but forced out or otherwise, or stayed in and had negative impacts because of COVID, have bad paper otherwise, just getting these cases filed with the BCMR, seeking relief in that way, and then being able to give those numbers, report those numbers to Congress, to the Secretary of Defense. I think that is sometimes the way, you almost have to show them how large the problem is so they can understand it. Because that's what happened during COVID. Nobody understood that so many people were going to say, no, this is unconstitutional. This is an unlawful order. No, there is a legitimate faith-based reason, right, to object to this vaccine. They didn't understand that there were going to be over 250,000 people that were not interested in getting this vaccine for various reasons and were willing to fight back. So I think we have to kind of show them the breadth and the depth of the problem as we move forward if we're going to make everyone whole.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Well, we are standing by to try to help as many people as we can. We will get processes in place to try to do that, just like we did during COVID. This is going to be a fast moving thing. So, stay active on X, follow us on social media, and we will try to get updates out there as much as we can. And we're going to do everything we can to help as many people as possible. Please be patient with us through this process. We are bringing in help to try to address as many of these cases as we can. So again, thanks for your time. Appreciate all that you do. Thank you for your service. God bless you. And we'll see you guys next time. Take care.
Left to men like Davis Younts fight for these Navy SEALs.
Paul Davis Younts, you are an attorney who has successfully defended naval officers.
Davis Younts has been instrumental in defending.
Davis Younts successfully defended an evangelical Navy lieutenant